All right, welcome back. Here is another little mini lesson on human genetics in the few topics we're covering in chapter 16. So this one, I just wanted to give you some examples of human diseases that are caused by recessive and dominant genetic mutations, not so much sex-linked or on the X or Y chromosome, but what's called autosomal. So autosomal are conditions that are caused by mutations on chromosomes number 1 through 22. So like color blindness or hemophilia or Fragile X, those are all considered sex-linked traits, where these examples we're going to talk about are not sex-linked traits. They are mutations on any of the chromosomes number 1 through 22. They're going to have their particular chromosome. I just don't know which chromosome they're on. So the first slide is just talking about some examples of autosomal recessive. So this would be to have this particular trait, you would have to be homozygous recessive. So for sickle cell, if this was your genotype, you would be little s, because if you had homozygous dominant or heterozygous, you would have normal blood. For cystic fibrosis, you would be little f, and for phenylketonuria, let's say little p. So your genotype in autosomal recessive disorders, you are homozygous recessive. So some little bit of background of these. So in sickle cell anemia, what happens is the mutation is in your hemoglobin gene. So hemoglobin is a protein that's inside of your red blood cells. It allows it to bind to oxygen and then transfers and transports that oxygen from your lungs to the rest of your body. Now, in a hemoglobin mutation, particularly for sickle cell, the hemoglobin is misshapen a little bit. And so when oxygen levels get low, the hemoglobin kind of bends into a weird shape, right? We know the shape of proteins are very important to its function. And because red blood cells are just jam-packed full of hemoglobin, if these millions of molecules of hemoglobin are misshapen, it's going to cause the entire red blood cell to misshape. So instead of being a nice, flexible, biconcave disc like a regular red blood cell, it turns into these weird kind of sickle-shaped, long, spindly-shaped cells, which get stuck in the capillaries. It's very painful, and it can be a fatal disease. So a lot of times the way that this is inherited is you might have two normal individuals that are carriers of the trait. I know I'm kind of running into the picture. I don't have a lot of room to draw today. So you're going to get 25% homozygous dominant, 50% heterozygous, and a 25% chance homozygous recessive. So two normal individuals that are carriers have a 25% chance of having an offspring that is going to be homozygous recessive and show traits of that particular disease. And that's going to be the same inheritance pattern for any of these autosomal recessive disorders. If you have two carriers or heterozygotes, there will be a 25% chance the offspring will have that particular condition. So a lot of times, if people are known to have this particular trait in their family, they might do some genetic counseling before they decide to get married or have children to determine what the likelihood is on passing that trait on to their offspring. This other disease is cystic fibrosis. We talked a little bit about that already when we were covering the term pleiotropy, in that you have mutation at one loci, and so that one mutation can have phenotypic impacts on a wide variety of body systems. So here it is a mutation in this ion channel pump, and it messes up the movement of ions and fluid and mucus, and so you end up with thick mucus in your respiratory tract and your digestive tract. Your sweat glands don't work very well, your reproductive glands don't work very well, your absorption of nutrients is hard. So a lot of times people are small in stature, they might be malnourished, they likely have a lot of bacterial infections in their lungs because they have this thick mucus that's stagnant, and bacteria just love to grow in those types of environments. And then the last one is PKU, which stands for fetal ketonuria, which is, again, an autosomal recessive disorder where our bodies lack an enzyme, which is called phenylalanine hydroxylase, which takes phenylalanine and converts it to tyrosine. So in the normal healthy person, we have here, right, they have this enzyme. So that is the green little box, and it converts phenylalanine into tyrosine. When somebody doesn't have it, they cannot do that. And so their body has this buildup of phenylalanine, which accumulates and circulates the blood. And if it accumulates too much, it can become toxic and start damaging tissues, especially brain tissue. So this is what babies get tested for. Usually within their first week of life. It's a heel prick test. If you've ever had kids and taken them to their first doctor's appointments after they're born, they prick the heel, they put the blood on a little piece of paper, they send that off, and the lab looks for this mutation, because if you know it early enough, all you have to do usually is to avoid phenylalanine in your diet. And if you don't consume phenylalanine, then you don't have to worry about accumulating too much. But if you don't know, you could start accumulating phenylalanine unbeknownst to you that could be the problem. So that's one of the reasons why that test is done so early on in life. All right, so those are just a few examples, some of the most common examples of autosomal recessive disorders. There's a ton out there, but these ones are pretty well known and pretty well documented in our human population. The last slide is covering autosomal dominant disorders. So just like our polydactyly that we use on the pedigree, dominant disorders are if you have a dominant allele, you will have that particular phenotype. So that would be like big T, or big T, little t. You would have that trait, and the homozygous recessive, you would be considered the normal phenotype. You wouldn't have that particular effect. So in the kind of the purple box over here, it's just showing how that dominant allele can be passed on from affected heterozygote dad, in this case, passing on to the offspring. We already looked at polydactyly, so many fingers. Polydactyly is a dominant trait. Some types of dwarfism are a dominant trait. And then I've also shown up here Huntington's disease, which is a degenerative brain disorder where as you age, your brain kind of starts breaking down. I don't know the physiology or the mechanism behind that degeneration of the brain tissue, but you can see it's pretty significant in these slices of brain between a Huntington's disease individual and the control. Now, for Huntington's, it's a little bit trickier because it's not an obvious thing. Like 6 fingers, you're going to know that you have that trait. If you are a dwarf stature, you know you're going to have that trait. Huntington's disease is not quite the same. So let's say you have somebody who is a carrier, marry somebody who is normal, or they mate and they have children. So here is that potential offspring phenotype. So again, we have 50% potentially having it and 50% normal phenotype. The unfortunate thing with Huntington's disease is the expression of the disease usually does not start showing itself until after reproductive age, usually in an individual's 40s and 50s. So if you don't know of any family history and you just happen to have this particular mutation on the chromosome that causes Huntington's, you've already gone through your reproductive years. You probably already have kids. And if you marry somebody who is normal phenotype, I should say, the homozygous recessive, there's a 50% chance that your kids could have it and you didn't even know. And so you start showing signs and symptoms of neurological degeneration, you're diagnosed with Huntington's disease, and before you could even have a choice, you've already potentially passed that trait onto your offspring. So genetic testing, genetic counseling are very helpful tools for individuals to determine if that's something, if they know this is in their family history, that they have that ability to figure out if they are a carrier or maybe if they have it. So if you are one of these kiddos, right? So if this is a male, like a son, oops, there we go. My computer was lagging there a little bit. So if this is you and you're, say, 13, 14, 15 years old and your dad starts showing signs and symptoms of Huntington's, you have the ability to go and get tested to determine whether that will be your future or not. That's a hard question to ask. Do you want to know if that's your future or do you want to just live life? That's a hard situation to be in. All right, so those are some examples of human autosomal dominant disorders. And that's it. So that wraps up all of our chapter 16 information. So I will see you next time.